Hello, we welcome you all to another episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast. Once again with your hosts, myself, Bernhard Gunther, and my wife, Laura Matsu. The title of this episode is The Eclipse, Mass Trauma, and the Battle for Consciousness. So in this podcast, in this first hour, we'll touch on the assassination of Charlie Kirk and our own experience around it, our own views, how his death also connects to the Pisces-Virgo eclipse season we are just coming out of, and the ways both his and Erica's chart, his wife, are activated by this eclipse. Very interesting insights there. We'll also explore the broader themes of the Pisces-Virgo axis from an astrological perspective, obviously, and how they may be showing up in your own life right now. We'll then look at the different reactions to his death and an assassination as examples of primitive versus mature defenses. We'll examine some of the theories, doubts, and conspiracy narratives that's been floating around and that are emerging, and consider also how counterintelligence programs can infiltrate the truth movement. We will reflect on how Charlie's death ties also into a core Pluto and Aquarius theme of mass trauma, and what it actually means to anchor true discernment in an increasingly confusing time and age we're in right now. And obviously how this ties into spiritual warfare and also hostile entities tagging into trauma and our shadow with their goal to pit humans against humans and feed off the polarization. Now in the second hour, which is always available for members, we'll dive deeper into what it means to be in the quote-unquote birth canal of a new era as Uranus and Neptune move retrograde in the coming months and how this may manifest in your personal life as well. We'll also cover how to recognize dissociation and PTSD symptoms, pathways to healing trauma, and the essential skills that can lead to a post-traumatic growth. Finally, we'll also explore how to integrate the collective shadow that is surfacing right now by taking responsibility for our own personal shadows. Once again, if you are not a member yet, you can go to my website, veilofreality.com/membership and get access there to over 160 episodes of the second hour. And also a quick announcement, we still have a few spots left in my upcoming 10-week private group program called Mastering Spiritual Warfare, Discerning the Unseen Forces and the Path to Embodied Sovereignty. It starts on October 21st until December 23rd. It's by application only, and we are about 80% full. So you can learn more about it at masteringspiritualwarfare.com and apply there.
Okay, so let's just give an overview. I'm sure there's people internationally who maybe are not clear about what happened. So we're just going to give you an overview for the context of this podcast. So on September 10th, just a few days after the first eclipse in this current eclipse season, we saw popular conservative commentator Charlie Kirk was assassinated while giving a talk at a university in Utah. This event has obviously sparked a whole wave of reactions. It's really fueled the political polarization in the U.S., which is really reaching a boiling point right now between left, right, etc. The official story is that he was killed by a lone gunman who had a trans roommate and became increasingly radicalized into far-left ideologies online, and that he's now in police custody awaiting trial. However, many people have raised alternative theories, some questioning whether the lone gunman acted alone, and all sorts of theories unpacking this, and others going so far as to question whether the event even happened at all. So I want to begin by sharing our own take, even though I know it will upset people, because it already has upset a bunch of people online. We've been called all sorts of names for this. We believe the assassination was real. Yet we also see a ton of suspicious inconsistencies in the official story. And also, we want to kind of zoom out and see how this moment is already being weaponized politically to deepen division. So we're examining all the evidence with an open mind. We're willing to be wrong. I watch almost every single one of Candace Owens' podcasts on this or
she's
YouTube stream. Yeah, she's on a roll. And, you know, I watch it with an open mind. Like, I think it's really important to be super discerning with the information you're taking in right now as well, but not being so rigid and closed and fixed on a certain narrative, because the truth is we don't know actually right now. So I think what concerns us most, though, is that there's this dogma behind the truth movement where a lot of people now have very fixed views and emotionally charged opinions about what happens. They attack and label anyone who disagrees with their own opinion about what happened. They call them controlled op, shill. And this kind of rigidity is the opposite of genuine truth seeking. So, if you can't tolerate alternative perspectives, you may end up demonizing us for what we share here. But I encourage you to listen with an open mind, because whether or not we agree on the official story, the deeper purpose of this podcast is to explore how this all links in with the mass trauma and how that mass trauma can affect us and how to avoid letting it polarize us, traumatize us, and divide us even further, which obviously doesn't serve us and our own lives. It only serves people who are in power who benefit off that division. So, kind of just to touch on this briefly, I just want to share my own personal experience of what happened. And I also want to note, after I shared some of the astrology on Instagram, quite a few people have come up to me saying that they had strange physical symptoms, especially an upset stomach was a very common thing, but also sort of throat issues or an intuitive sense that something was up leading up to this happening, including myself. Like, the night before, for example, I was kind of going over some of the darkest traumas in my life, thinking about the nature of evil and how it manifested through very pathological people I've met in my life, and kind of reflecting on my past experiences and confrontations with evil manifesting through people. So I was already in this kind of descent when this happened. And when I was checking out social media, I saw the first initial, news that he had been shot. And I was pretty much glued to social media once I saw that news. And then unfortunately, I did see the very graphic, violent shot of him being killed. And I basically went into shock myself. So I was just frozen. I couldn't stop scrolling, couldn't stop checking for hours, and even leading into the next days as well. I was able to cry a little bit initially after it happened, but I could tell, because I have, a relationship with my own nervous system. I was dissociated. I couldn't sleep that night, and I basically felt sick to my stomach all day the next day, and finally, a few days after, I was able to finally cry and process, which I highly recommend. If you can just take some time to process what's come up for you and just even cry about it, it can be really healing, and it can release a lot of that stress. And then recognizing, okay, I'm not going to let this traumatize me, this affect my life, my relationships, my purpose. I've already been traumatized so much in my life that I can recognize the signs. Okay, this was really graphic. This was really terrible. So I took some time off social media to take care of myself, to get into my body, to focus on my relationships, to process everything that happened. And I highly recommend, if you haven't done that already, to maybe taking some time for yourself to do that. And we'll talk about some kind of stuff you can do to work with your own nervous system, because if you're still kind of constantly in a death scroll, feeling burnt out, but anxious, feeling hypervigilant, it's a sign you need to take care of yourself.
Can I just add to this as well? Just want to be clear also, the way it affected you, I could tell, was obviously witnessing as well, and me to a degree as well, because I saw it also, the shot close up was very visceral, and I will talk more about it later, specifically about the various theories and all of that, tying into that. But I want to be clear that both of us, we don't have, it's not like we are Charlie Kirk fans or into the conservative movement or turning point.
Not at all.
Right? It's not, you weren't shocked and grieving because, not necessarily specifically about him, but because of the event, the energy behind it, right?
Well, seeing someone get brutally murdered is a trauma, period.
Yeah.
Whether you agree with their takes or not, we're not witnessing that in person or even on the screen is a trauma. So I just want to name that. And then also people like me who have a history of trauma, we can easily get kicked back into dissociation, and we need to bring ourselves back and focus on, it can easily trigger a lot of old traumatic stress.
Yeah, to be clear, because this is beyond whatever political views.
I actually disagree with almost 80% of what he says. I know a lot of people say that or whatever, but I actually share some similar values with him. And it's interesting, even leading up to this, I didn't follow Charlie Kirk. I wasn't a big fan of him to begin with. So this has nothing to do with being a big Charlie Kirk fan, but it was twofold. It was witnessing what happened and then witnessing all the people celebrate. So it was like a double whammy of like confrontation with evil. That was a lot for me to process. So I was like, you know what? Perfect time to take some time off, take care of myself. We went for a little trip. I just focused on my body, on healing, on bringing myself back to safety. So that's really key. So now let's just talk a little bit about the symbolism and themes of the Pisces Virgo eclipse, because everything that's happening is rich with symbolism from this axis. Astrologically, we see Christianity, martyrdom, sacrifice, surrender, and the eclipse has brought these themes into focus, both personally and collectively. So Charlie Kirk was basically shot a few days after the September 7th Virgo eclipse, which landed on his Chiron in Virgo. And because Chiron is squaring his nodes, this eclipse activated a karmic crossroads in his life. So the Virgo Pisces themes connect deeply with Christianity. Charlie often used to say, God, use me for your will. This statement of surrender is very Piscean. On the other side, you see his Chiron in Virgo reflected in his favorite biblical phrase, which was, well done, good and faithful servant, because Virgo represents service, discipline, and a humble dedication of your life to serve God. And so the transits on the day of his death were really interesting, because the moment I saw this, I was like, wow, this is not good. These are not good transits to be shot under. And so on the day of the shooting, Uranus was in Gemini, conjunct Charlie's south node and square his Chiron in Virgo. So Uranus symbolizes shock, sudden events, liberation. It really activated his karmic Virgo south or Gemini south node, suggesting that there was going to be an abrupt unfolding of potentially a past life storyline related to martyrdom. He also had Mars, the god of war, conjunct his sun with Chiron, which is transiting Aries, opposing his sun-Jupiter conjunction. So this archetypally reflects an act of violence against the self or identity sun, and kind of activating this wound of sacrifice. And then, Charlie's advocacy for free speech ties into his south node in Gemini. So with the Uranus squaring the eclipse and his Chiron, these themes of voice, speech, truth became catalyzed in the collective as well. And his sudden passing, Uranus, activated this Virgo Chiron martyrdom archetype we see. And it's basically transformed him into a symbolic wounded healer whose death had to bear the weight of being a collective symbol of the martyr. And you heard martyr, martyr, martyr again and again in the speeches that followed. So it's very fascinating to see how that was picked up, and also reflects his astrology.
So just very quick for people who don't understand astrology, what we're doing right now, Laura looked at Charlie Kirk's birth chart, natal chart when he was born, and the transit that happened around the time when he was assassinated is really, really fascinating from that karmic, bigger picture perspective.
Yeah, and it really raises the question to me, was this part of a larger karmic pattern of martyrdom that he's carried across lifetimes? I looked at his chart even before this happened, and I saw the Chiron square the nodes. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. So, and then, not surprisingly, the eclipse sequence also coincided with Erica's chart. The next eclipse on September 21st was a new moon solar eclipse, signaling a karmic closure and a new beginning. Very fascinating that Erica Kirk herself is going through her nodal return, because she also has North Node in Pisces, where the transiting nodes are, and South Node in Virgo. So this is a major evolutionary turning point for her. And, I know there's all sorts of theories about her, about how she's processing her grief. I'm just talking to you about the astrology, and then,
we go into the theories later.
We can go into some of the theories later. So, but interestingly, her North Node has Jupiter, which is the ruler of Pisces, traditionally, retrograde in Gemini. So this expansion of faith, of destiny, is coming through trials that feel unlucky with Jupiter retrograde, yet they can contain profound spiritual meaning. And so you saw when Erica was on the stage at Charlie's memorial that she really was showing her Piscean North Node path when she said to the shooter she forgives him, because she was referencing Christ's word on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And so this is demonstrating the ultimate Piscean ideal of compassion, unconditional love, and divine grace. So I just wanted to point out those themes because the Pisces-Virgo axis has been so strong throughout this whole event, throughout this whole month. And you see it everywhere all over this event because it activated, their charts are both being activated on this axis. And so, this Virgo-Pisces axis will affect us all in a personal way. Ultimately, we want to balance the Pisces-Virgo archetypes. Shadow Virgo is all over right now. So there's over-analysis, like looking at the details. There's hyper-criticism, obsession with data, collecting information, getting lost in the mental realm in our heads. You can see this through this obsessive analysis that took place after his death. And then the shadow sides of Pisces is, number one, traumatic events tend to trigger old addictions. Also, delusional thinking is a Pisces North Node, confusion, escapism. So the task is not to reject either side, but to integrate them. So Virgo, on the Virgo side of healing, we need to use this moment as an opportunity to break addictions, maybe limit media, eat clean, establish healthy routines, get our body back in order. Because the thing is we don't have proper discernment if our body is bogged down by either trauma or poor diet or poor lifestyle. So it's really asking us, can we get clean? Can we purify our body and mind? So can we ground in physical health? Do we need to detoxify? Do we need to take some alternative medicine treatments, which is related to Virgo? And also, the healthier we are in body and mind, the more that we have discernment, which is discernment is also, discernment within ourselves, first of all. So discerning which voices, which thoughts in your own psyche are helpful and which are distortions, but then extending that to the outer world, because we don't have inner discernment, we don't have outer discernment, which I'll talk about in a second. And then the Pisces side is to balance this information seeking of constantly, obsessing over details with a spiritual focus, which is surrender, forgiveness, grace, compassion. So cultivate a daily spiritual practice so you can quiet the mind, connect to your body, work with prayer, engage in activities that are aligned with your authentic self and your dharma, rather just getting caught in a death scroll of like conspiracies and focusing on what happened. And then also, shifting from this left brain analysis to right brain vision, which is seeing things through a more holistic, symbolic, and universal lens. Okay. So now I want to just cover these different reactions we've seen from a psychological perspective, because I thought this was very, very interesting. So when we have a reaction to a traumatic event, it can either come under the category of a primitive defense or a mature defense. And primitive defenses, I think we all have them. They all tend to show up under stress, but they'll distort reality heavily, and they tend to lead to more chaos in relationships rather than integration and healing of the event. So, an example of the primitive of a primitive defense and what happened would be, number one, denial. So this didn't happen; it's fake. The reason why this happened is because if reality is too overwhelming, the psyche needs to say it didn't happen at all to defend itself against the horror. So this protects against terror and grief, but tends to cut you off from empathy and a sense of mourning with others. So that's one of them. And we've seen that all over the place. And you know what? And this is why this is going to be controversial for some of the truthers or whatever, but I do think that there's an intelligence behind even thinking it's fake, because even with myself, with all of my own background of understanding trauma and healing trauma within myself, if I found this traumatic, I can't imagine how it was for people who already had a backload of unprocessed trauma, and then leading into this horrific event. So that's one of the things, denial. And it's meant to protect you. You have to keep in mind there's an intelligence behind this, but it doesn't lead to integration. And then there's a splitting, which is black and white thinking, which is all of them are evil. Anyone grieving is brainwashed. The world is divided into good and evil. And this gives you a sense of certainty in the moment of chaos, but tends to fuel the hatred for who you see to be the other side. And then there's projection, which would show up in, it's just the left's fault or the right's fault or the deep state or Israel now, basically.
In very oversimplified ways.
Exactly. Yeah. They stage this to manipulate us, basically. And so, again, projection exists to offload unbearable feelings, and they project their own feeling of helplessness or fear onto a scapegoat or a group they don't like. And this relieves, again, tension, but fuels paranoid thinking and blame. And then there's dehumanization. Oh, he got what he deserved, or cheering at violence. So pain and fear are numbed by treating others as less than human. And these defenses tend to show up after trauma because mass trauma, traumatic events, leave us feeling overwhelmingly helpless. And primitive defenses are the fastest way to not feel helpless. So we need to understand that there's an intelligence behind the way that we respond to things that are in service to protecting ourselves against unbearable pain. So it short circuits any feelings like grief or vulnerability and replaces them with certainty, rage, or just feeling detached. So it's to protect you, actually. It's a protective mechanism. But the consequences are that these primitive defensives spread contagiously, where one person's denial or projections give others permission to adopt the same. It creates these mass psychosis of echo chambers. They tend to fracture community bonds at the exact moment when solidarity and empathy could be most needed. And they tend to create a secondary trauma of polarization, where people are then not traumatized only by the event, but how others responded, which is kind of what we're seeing now. So primitive defenses, they block grief, they block the processing the emotion, and they escalate division, while mature defenses are how we can metabolize what happened, metabolize the grief, and keep ourselves human. So a mature defense on the other side would be channeling the feelings you had into something socially constructive, like writing about it or expressing it in art, taking your anger and grief and allowing yourself to feel it and channel it in something purposeful. Also, conscious suppression is actually a mature defense, where you decide, okay, I'm going to set this aside for now so I can focus, so I can take a break from social media, so I can focus on getting into my body, so I can focus on things that bring me joy, that connect me to daily life. That could be an example of mature suppression. Like, instead of getting hooked on the constant stream of new information, be like, I need to take care of myself. I'm going to leave this alone for now and take care of myself and do whatever I need to do to heal. And, you could also deal with stress by helping others, by connecting with others. We're going to talk about more, especially later on, about how co-regulation is really key. And we really lost that, especially over the past 5 years, which is basically being able to talk to others, share with others, process with others as a way of returning back home to safety within ourselves. Seeking support from others is really key, because trauma tends to isolate you, or make you see everything in the world out there as hostile. So finding people who you can talk to. I cannot stress that enough, actually. Just having someone in your life that you can just talk to about how you're feeling, who is not hopefully dysregulated, and kind of help you bring yourself back to a sense of safety. So basically, a mature response to a trauma would redirect or transform the energy into something that serves growth and connection, while primitive defenses block grief and escalate division. So we see a lot of really primitive defenses going on, which is creating a secondary trauma for many, because they just see, oh my God, like, people have lost their minds.
Excellent. Thank you so much for this background. So it's really important to understand that you can already see this event from different levels, not only levels of consciousness, but also from a bigger picture perspective, potentially karmic trajectories, divine will, beyond anything we can really, the mind can understand. But like Laura explained very interestingly, overlaying the transits over both Erica and Charlie Kirk's natal chart, there's an evolutionary process and karmic lesson, and maybe even divine will we don't really understand, right? So beyond all the conspiracies. Yeah. And the way we then respond definitely triggers something within ourselves, depending on the material that's already within us.
Yes.
We have to understand, again, we haven't made an episode about this before. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are, filtered through our perceptions, our shadow material, and our unconscious trauma. Hence, and then we can easily mistake that as truth. That's why I always say it's imperative, especially nowadays, for a truth seeker to engage in inner psychospiritual work, to understand your projection, shadow, or trauma, inner child wounding, which everyone has without exception to varying degrees. Otherwise, you get easily distracted and even misled, and you can, as Gurdjieff said, dream of being awake but deeply asleep. So, with that being said, let's look at some of these theories that have come up, conspiracy theories, narratives, doubts, and all of that around the Charlie Kirk assassination. Now, before I get into that, a bit background, if people are not aware of my work or haven't followed us for a while, I would just want to be clear, especially on my website, veilofreality.com. I had this website, even an older blog on WordPress for over 20 years. So I've been speaking out and writing about conspiracies, false flag attacks, psyops, even fake shootings and stage events, literally since the 90s, even especially since 9/11, shortly after I wrote about 9/11, the ultimate psyop false flag attack, right? And false flag in that sense, not that it was staged and fake and didn't happen, but the good old Hegelian dialect, problem, reaction, solution, right? They want to create some sort of problem and then manipulate the reaction in the public and then bring in the solution. I've spoken out and written about many articles about past shootings, high school shootings, Sandy Hook, Boston bombing, all of that, entertained all different theories and all of that, from false flag psyop to possibly staged and all of that. But I've seen how I've also evolved. Some of my views have changed, mostly also not because of necessarily new information came in, but through my own inner process. Because in the past, I have to say, I was also maybe more psychologically split, very black and white thinking. My own stuff came in, projecting, a bit overly dogmatic, not nuanced, and all of this. Absolutely, right? So I want to say with that in mind that absolutely Laura, we both, like she said at the beginning, questioned the official narrative around Charlie Kirk, right? This guy is probably just a patsy, maybe didn't act around, maybe even did the shot. Maybe somebody completely else did it. Maybe it's kind of like a JFK thing and he's just like the Oswald patsy, right? There could be foreign intelligence involved, deep state, who knows, right? I would not claim to know exactly what happened right out the gate, right? I'm not saying I know exactly what happened. And very much likely it sounds like a psyop to increase the polarization between left and right, to get that going, even from a hyperdimensional perspective, to provide more luge for these hostile forces to feed upon, and as left and right keep projecting on each other, right? But in one narrative that came out in some fraction of the quote-unquote truther movement is that the event was fully staged, meaning Charlie Kirk is still alive. There was a hologram or AI or just some fake blood and all of this. And everybody else is acting, including Erica Kirk with the casket, and
all
the
the
speech
eyewitnesses.
and the eyewitnesses and everybody, like the FBI, police, this whole team at Turning Point has to be in on it. And honestly, in my perception, giving like an insane Oscar-worthy performance that would put David Day-Lewis to shame. And they would have to keep that going on forever, basically, while, I don't know, Charlie Kirk is just somewhere hiding, I suppose, right? Again, those narratives, from my perspective, contrast starkly with the logistical complexity, right? It required to simulate all these elements. One of the main things I saw that, especially, again, I've been in this quote-unquote game for a long time. Again, I don't claim to know all the truth, but I've seen a shift happening in the quote-unquote truther movement since 2020, since the pandemic, right? And very understandable, because that's when we, for the first time, almost on the mass level, realized how much we're being lied to, right? A lot of people started only waking up only a few years ago during the pandemic. And but with that, in the truther movement came an explosion of everything is fake claims. Everything's a psyop, this is a shill, extreme psychological splitting, meaning black and white thinking, right? And then truthers projecting all kinds of stuff onto Erica Kirk, for example, and how she's supposed to grieve and why it's odd and this and that. And then what I've also noticed over the past 5 years with the rise of social media, so many people all of a sudden become experts, forensic experts, just by watching like a 10-second clip and this and that on social media, analyzing, and everybody is this expert, being able to analyze and not realizing how it may be overlaid with the own projections or assumptions and not actually the truth, so to speak, right? So what I've noticed is almost a parody version of a truth seeker emerging over the past 5 years. And I don't mean this as an ad hominem attack or taking it personal. I think it ties into what Laura described, that we've become so traumatized, even unconsciously, over the past 5 years with everything that's happening, that the psyche automatically shuts certain things out and distorts to protect itself from the immensity, from the horror that's happening, even especially from a real-life event. Because I saw the assassination of Charlie Kirk, I saw the close-up, and I have to say, for me personally, I've seen many dark things in my life, right? But that affected me like right away, got nauseous, it felt very disturbing, and felt extremely real to me, right? And then other people say, no, it's a simulation, it's fake. And that could easily be also, again, a trauma response, a defense mechanism, so to speak.
Well, feeling like things are not real, which I'll touch on later, is an aspect of PTSD. I've had this many times before where you don't feel like the world is real. Like sometimes the colors don't seem real. Everyone seems kind of fake. It's definitely a symptom of PTSD. It's called depersonalization and derealization.
And I think that's how you see this so a lot across the truther movement. Again, mostly people just analyze via social media posts, and it's not really research to begin with, but they connect dots based on their own projections, almost defense mechanism, and then everything becomes staged and fake.
Yes.
Right? Nothing is real anymore. It's like it's almost, from a trauma response, you can see it that way, that because everybody's, and I can understand it, everybody's lying to us, so you don't trust anyone, you don't trust life, everything must be staged and faked. It's the ultimate psychological splitting in extreme black and white.
This is a hypervigilance and also...
Right. Again, I could be wrong. Okay, if there's 0.001%, maybe it is all faked, everybody's still acting, and Charlie Kirk is alive, okay, I would never put an absolute, but sorry, I have to note that there's a lot of logistic complexities. Even, for example, with Erica Kirk grieving over her husband, on this casket, and they say it's a mannequin, and look at her ring, it's a G, she's a Freemason, this oversimplification of it's Illuminati, Freemason, right? By the way, her daughter's name is Gigi, could easily be a ring honoring her daughter, who knows? But it's so oversimplified, or then people say, I saw Candace Owen is also in on it, apparently. She's an Illuminati because she made Illuminati signs during her some of her podcast transmissions and all of that. I've been called an Illuminati, right? I remember I gave a talk 6 years ago at the Anacapulco conference in Mexico about the Matrix and all of this. And somebody took a freeze frame from my talk where I make a weird, my hand movement makes some sort of pyramid sign, and then calls me out, exposing me as part of the Freemasons, that I'm an Illuminati.
Yeah.
That's the kind of insanity we're dealing with, right? People want to see what they only want to see, especially these hand signs and freeze frames and all of that. So this is not real evidence.
And just to touch on like Erica Kirk, because she's getting a lot of heat, and people don't understand also when you go through something horrific, you can easily compartmentalize what goes on. Like they expect her to just be sobbing and crying and sullen all the time. Like when you experience grief, it tends to come in waves, almost like tidal waves. Like sometimes you're fine, and then sometimes you're not, right? And also, she does have this Venus and Libra energy. She's almost got this like pageant like lady kind of energy where she's used to kind of flashing her smile and whatnot.
She's Miss Arizona.
And just because, like the thing is experiencing trauma doesn't mean you're never going to smile again. In fact, when I was the most traumatized, I was laughing and smiling tons. So this idea that going through a trauma means that you have to be sullen and crying and all the time is not true, because humans tend to compartmentalize things. We can like kind of put them aside and then do what we need to do and then go back to it later. And so there's all sorts of ways that we can also process trauma that can be, you never know what you're going to be like unless you're in that situation either. Yeah,
it's also very disturbing because on her Instagram account, so many people attack her for acting and being an actress and going off on her. It's really disturbing. I see that as a form of evil, by the way, as well, right? These kind of attacks. But people think this is just fake, so they're acting in their own quote-unquote good faith. So enough of all the different conspiracies. So just to bring it down, we don't believe it's all fake and staged and acted and all of that. But yes, the official story is to be questioned, right?
Yeah.
But I think, like you said, you made a good point with the Virgo thing. You can overly fall into analysis paralysis, over-analysis.
Yeah.
Right? Because I was thinking, I've been also exposing quote-unquote conspiracies for 25 years. So, at some point you have to realize the world is not going to change by just trying to expose conspiracies. Keep in mind, 9/11 lies still in place. We just had a moment of uncovering the JFK assassination conspiracy from over 60 years ago or so. So something different needs to happen, a shift in consciousness. And the world is not going to be saved. We're not going to awaken just by quote-unquote exposing conspiracies. It's not this mental awakening. And that ties into what you mentioned about discernment, right? We want to be discerning. We want to be separate truth from lies. But real discernment requires really an inner alignment, not just surface level intellectual information discernment, externally oriented. So, which means we need to also turn inward and differentiate within ourselves, right? Even Gurdjieff gave this very popular quote that, if you're not able to discern the truth and lies within yourself, you're not be able to discern truth and lies inside the world. What does he mean by that? He means by that we have all these different parts within ourselves, this from an esoteric perspective or psychological perspective, which can filter and cloud our perception, so to speak, or pollute our perception. What parts are these? Well, we can easily have a trauma response, as Laura talked about, thinking this is our true self coming through, or sub-personalities coming through, an inner child we identify with, which we mistake for the true self. Our shadow gets triggered and we made it projected externally into the world and others. Many other forces can influence us. That ties into spiritual warfare, right? A lot of people acknowledge the idea of spiritual warfare, especially nowadays. It's a spiritual warfare we are engaging in and all of that. But people are still externally oriented, not understanding the number one task to face in spiritual warfare is understanding what is affecting you, what forces are working through you, because our mind is porous. We're constantly influenced by all kinds of thought forms, entities, beings, our inner parts, shadow parts, as I mentioned, sub-personalities. So we need to be able to differentiate within ourselves what is what. This is the task of esoteric work. And only until you have a better grasp on that, can you then have a better grasp on quote-unquote outside events. So your perception and discernment in the outside world gets not polluted unconsciously or distorted through your own stuff or stuff that you're not even aware of. Hence, it's very holistic. So in other words, we need to do the inner work again on a psycho-spiritual level. Otherwise, we are not only deceiving ourselves, but we are easier manipulated. And that's really the key point. That, if you not really understand yourself, know thyself, you can easily be manipulated into false conspiracies, which brings you to another topic. One of the main big topics I've spoken out about and wrote about a long time ago, more 10, 15 years ago, is something called counterintelligence programs, CONTEL-PRO. Some people know this about the True UFO movement, right? These are PSYOP infiltration, and counterintelligence programs, they infiltrate usually other movements or other organizations, right, to turn them against themselves, to destroy them from within. Now, what also can happen, that these counterintelligence programs designed by the deep state, they can literally infuse fake conspiracies into the truther movement to take the bait, to mislead them, vector them off the path and distract them from what's really happening. So it's definitely a possibility. I'm not saying this is the truth, but it's a possibility that this whole, it's all staged, it's all fake, could have been seed planted by counterintelligence programs to vector the truthers away from what's really happening and make it completely outlandish.
Yeah, there's
right?
actually, I want to point out too, there's a few accounts I know on Twitter are almost, or I don't know, but I have a strong sense, are purely exist to spread disinformation. Yeah. One of them being this news site, The People's Voice. The past 5 years, I've seen so much fake information mixed with like truth on that particular account. So, and then I have to also say, some of the articles coming out, even on Substack, they're new accounts, they're anonymous, like there's no tracing them. And so, we have to be really discerning with the information that we take in and corroborate it with multiple sources and also having the inner discernment to tell, because there's so much like nonsense out there, and it can be the easiest thing in the world for an intelligence agency to plant this and just start a Substack, publish an article.
And you don't have to do much. It's just planting the seed because of the trauma and everything that's happening. I mentioned of the past 5 years, people jump so easily in these outrageous conspiracies because they're psychologically split, not nuanced, extreme black and white. Yeah. And then it takes life on its own. But this, interesting, you mentioned this Twitter account, People's Voice. Interesting, Jordan Sather, give him a shout out. He has also tracked this page, and that had a different name in 2014 for many years, spreading all kinds of clickbait false conspiracies. And it's very shady, and you're right, there could be a counterintelligence operation, absolutely. Yeah. And it's so fast, but let me just see how popular it has become. He made this page, made a post a few days ago that Erica Kirk is a Mossad agent and human sex trafficker, something like that, right?
That's been going around.
That's been going around. She's a Freemason, human sex trafficker, and it's all fake and staged. That post got tens and thousands of likes, and I'm like, holy shit, holy shit, how many people just believe it? Or maybe on top of it, he could have also that if it's a counter-pro organization, who knows how many bots the account has bought for the likes to make it sound like more people believe that.
Yeah.
But it's outrageous. And when you listen to it, it's very weird. So many red flags over red flags. But that's how easily fake conspiracies can be injected into the so-called truther movement.
Yeah.
So if you don't understand even the concept of counterintelligence, how it affects truther movements, that's already a big one. And especially nowadays, it ties also into MKUltra. I made this case before too. Now, most people I would argue in the truther movement know what MKUltra is, right? This clandestine program, intelligence program where people are being mind controlled through trauma to carry out certain agendas and all of that. And but you can also mind control masses and even within the truther movement, because you have to understand these deep state counterintelligence operations. They also understand psychology. They even understand trauma, absolutely. They know, they take it as an advantage that people less and less trust the government, that everything is simulated. They're constantly lying. You cannot trust anyone. They use this to their advantage to then infuse these fake conspiracies, because they know a lot of people will believe that anyway. So they take advantage of the trauma, in a sense, like an MKUltra operation, and then quote-unquote mind control susceptible, traumatized truthers who don't know they're traumatized with these fake conspiracies, and everybody's in on it, and everything is acted to an extreme. And what's the goal? Well, just to, again, distract from what is really happening and veer them off the path and just spend waste a lot of time and energy in senseless rabbit holes.
Control the narrative too with fake info and confuse everyone too. I think the confusion and the illusions being spread are part of what's going on.
Exactly. So it's all part. So that's just on a 3D level. Now, when we zoom out, which we've been talking about in spiritual warfare, you have to understand there are other forces who are truly benefiting from this polarization, from this luchfest, from the projections towards Charlie Kirk, Erica Kirk, or truthers versus normies, and in between left and right, who just fight of what is truth, what is wrong, and project on each other. These are the occult forces, hyperdimensional forces that have been controlling humanity from behind the veils for thousands of years, that feed off that lush, and we give it to them so easily, through the polarization and all of that. Doesn't mean just to be in love and light and turn the other cheek and all of that. But again, it requires a deeper differentiation and discernment and inner alignment, so we don't become puppet to other forces we are simply not aware of.
Yeah, and by the way, because I got this comment a lot where people said I was like fueling polarization because I had an opinion about what happened, because I was disturbed about what happened, and also touched on that people were acting soulless. I got this comment a lot like, oh, you're fueling the polarization. It's like, having an opinion about something doesn't mean that you're fueling the polarization. I'm not saying it's all the left, it's all the right, or whatever. I'm just stating that I've seen an epidemic of soullessness, which I think is connected to trauma over the past 5 years and beyond, which I think needs to be addressed. And maybe the vaccine also made that worse, as we've touched on in a couple other podcasts. So
this is an important point, because the solution is not like pacifism or that the truth is in the middle and just dissociating from it all. No, it affects all of us. Sometimes you need to make a stand. Evil, external, outside exists as well. Absolutely. It's within and without. It's not, this love and light solution of just ignoring it all. It requires something way deeper, a shift in consciousness. But a shift in consciousness implies that you truly know yourself and understand the bigger forces, like you described so well at the beginning of this podcast. There's some bigger things happening, karmic trajectories, right? Who knows what even Charlie Kirk's soul lessons was from everything that happened, or always, quote unquote, was meant to happen. And then we need to be able to hold paradoxes in mind too, because we're dealing with duality and divine will and the higher will, evolutionary forces, karmic forces, and other forces all intersecting, all happening at the same time. You can get lost in that maze if you try to just figure it out mentally.
Yeah, the bigger picture is also a holistic thinking that I was pointing at with the Pisces archetype. Is like Virgo is the details, Pisces is the meaning that we make out of everything that happens. So it is important to zoom out. But how do we do that? We do that when we're healthy in mind, body, spirit, Virgo South Node, and we have a daily spiritual practice that connects us to the sacred, that connects us to God, that connects us to our heart and our souls and ourselves, and our souls are a portal to God. Because I also get this question a lot. It's like, why does going within even help? Shouldn't I just, go to a church and get a priest to tell me what to do? I've been asked similar questions like that. And in my view, the portal to God is within your heart. And this is the consciousness of Christ that Christians are hoping to awaken. And so the deeper that you go within, the more that you connect to the transcendent. And that's kind of the esoteric secret of the heart and how it connects to God and the higher spiritual forces. Okay. So
let's go into the bigger picture.
Yeah. So, I was thinking about this for a while. I don't know. I probably mentioned it on different podcasts, but Pluto in Aquarius does relate to a theme of mass trauma. So this is one of there's dark and light sides of Pluto in Aquarius. There's all sorts of keywords, but this is one of the biggest keywords. And when I saw this event, I was like, well, there you go. There's a Pluto in Aquarius mass trauma. And this next 20 years, it could intensify that. It can intensify this disembodiment, psychological fragmentation, collective psychosis. Pluto in Aquarius obviously historically correlates with collapse of old regimes, revolutions, political revolutions, cultural revolutions, technological revolutions, the emergence of radical new ideas, especially about freedom, equality, collective ideals, transformation in technology that's going to reshape our daily life. We see this with the whole AI revolution, and then also battles of power within groups and individuals. So the last time Pluto is Aquarius, you know this already if you're listening to the podcast, was obviously the Revolutionary War in America, Civil War. War is a trauma. So, Pluto entered Aquarius in 1777 at the war's midpoint, and many people endured displacement, disease. There was a lot of destruction, famine. Families and communities were also torn apart because people had different loyalties. Some were loyal to the British, some were revolutionaries. And then at the same time, we also had the French Revolution going on in France, which was probably the most dramatic trauma under Pluto and Aquarius, where there was public executions, mass hysteria, famine, the reign of terror. All of this creates a collective wound and mass trauma. And the old order was literally decapitated, which left society in a state of almost shock psychically. So we have this overall archetype or pattern of Pluto and Aquarius, mass trauma, fueled by one, collapse of structures, which leads to a sense of traumatic uncertainty and fear, mass violence that we've seen in the past, like public executions, uprising, bloodshed. Also, there can be an ongoing sense of alienation where individuals feel very powerless inside new, dehumanizing collective systems. And we actually see this kind of going on because there's a lot of fear. And I'm not saying that Palantir is like good or bad. I'm just saying there's a lot of focus on Palantir and the government and what are they going to do? And, it's a lot of people freaking out about that, which I would argue has a truth in it, but is also kind of being fueled by this mass trauma. And, there tends to also be revolutions and uprising born out of this trauma, with also the opportunity for collective healing that will and also collective trauma that can span across generations. So we see parallels to today with trauma around, number one, we see the collective psychic shocks like we saw with the pandemic, with the psychological warfare and ongoing polarization going on. Charlie Kirk's death definitely created collective PTSD, especially in the conservative movement and anyone who was touched by that. We also see this AI and technological alienation where, I think it's very fascinating to notice how our over-reliance on technology is really disconnecting us from humanity, and how we literally see someone murdered on screen and then just like laugh at a meme the next moment. Like, it's really created this dehumanization of who we are as humans, to be so oversaturated in media and be so disconnected from what we see on screen. And I think that's just going to keep going on. But then we also have AI, which is going to create a massive loss of jobs. So this is all going to keep going on for the next 20 years. And then we see these mass uprisings going on against corporations, the systems of power, global powers. And also the mass trauma is in this social fracture that we're seeing, where like people are divided. People are not speaking to family members, to friends. They feel scared to share their views to everyday people. They're often in a sense of hypervigilance. So we see many kind of factors here that kind of lead us into this collective trauma. And ultimately, it is really important that and I'll touch more about this on the second hour, is that we have to find a way to get back into our bodies, to heal ourselves in mind, body, and spirit, and to recognize signs of dissociation, signs of PTSD, find safe people that we can talk to and process with, find ways that we can connect to our body and bring ourselves back to center again, because traumatized people are easier to control. And so if we want to really wake up to like the matrix and how systems of power keep us pitted against each other in this game of divide and conquer, we actually have to heal the effects of the mass trauma over the next few years and beyond, and find a way that we can come back to ourselves so we can be healthy, strong individuals who are whole, who are centered, who are regulated, who are embodied, because that's the only way that we can create change in the world. If we're traumatized, we tend to lose executive function. We tend to not be able to contribute to the world. We tend to just be passive consumers because we're too frozen, too burnt out, too angry, too dysregulated to really create something meaningful. So I feel like over the next few years and beyond, we need to be able to really look at this idea of mass trauma and find ways that we can really heal our personal souls and our collective souls, because Pluto and Aquarius just began. Like, we have like 20 more years of this. So, some of us probably need to take a long break from what's going on online and just find ways that we can become healthy again, emotionally, physically, and psychologically, because this is the war that we're in, is that traumatized people are disconnected from themselves, their hearts, their bodies, each other, from God. And if it's a spiritual war, we need to really find a way that we can come back into harmony with all of those aspects of ourselves.
Yes, exactly. So let's finish this off. Speaking of spiritual warfare, back to that. That's why I also been so inspired to create that program, by the way, over the past years. I saw it more intensifying. The astrology talks about it. We are in a spiritual war. But again, there's so much misconception. Many people acknowledge it. Even the Christians talk about spiritual warfare and what happened with Charlie Kirk, and I absolutely agree. But it's still externalized. It's still out there, right? It's also externalizing God, externalizing evil, and absolutely we're dealing with evil entities. But as I alluded to previously, and also we have talked about more in the past podcast about spiritual discernment, is about inner differentiation. When we're talking about spiritual warfare, we're talking about spiritual realms and spiritual entities, and they don't exist out there. They constantly flow through us and affect us in unconscious ways. So we need to have an understanding, as Rudolf Steiner said, even an objective understanding of the different spiritual realms and the spiritual beings, entities that are there, and being able to differentiate what is what. Meaning, is this a shadow part of myself? Is this a conditioning, trauma response? Is it a subpersonality coming from, even from a Jungian perspective? Is it an animas, my inner masculine, inner feminine coming through? These are parts, even beings themselves. Shadow parts, right? Is this the ego versus the true self? All of this requires this deeply seated self-knowledge. Ultimately, as all the esoteric traditions have talked about, know thyself is more important than ever. So we don't mistake our false personality for the true personality, or our shadow projections and perceptions for truth, and all of this, or how these entities, forces can influence us with all kinds of thought injections and desires, and even manipulate our emotions. And then we think it's just us and we trust it. So which then inadvertently we project it externally, don't trust anybody out there when we actually need to questioning ourselves first and foremost. And this requires, again, goes back to sincere inner psycho-spiritual work. Because otherwise, if you're externally focused, trying to figure out conspiracies glued to the screen on the mental level alone, you'll be caught in the mental matrix. And I'm say it again, Neil Kramer gave a great expression for that. He called it how a lot of truthers get caught in what he calls the second matrix, the mental labyrinth, the mental presence of the schizoid paranoid mind. And I don't mean this as an ad hominem personal attack, but it's a trauma response when you're overly paranoid, right? And vigilant and hyper skepticism, right? About everything. Yeah. Because you're trapped in the mind.
And I would say doubt is very healthy in general, but when you don't trust anyone, when you're very paranoid and you see darkness everywhere, you veer too off into one direction without the balance of the other.
Yeah, and then you lie to yourself because so many people, I noticed, I've done my research and this feels off. My intuition tells me, well, can you really trust your feeling? And many people mistake all kinds of things, feelings, emotions, thoughts, stuff coming up within themselves for intuition, which is not intuition.
Yeah, well, I mean, intuition actually requires not having major emotional material, not being disconnected from your body, not being dissociated from your body, and also having the mind still enough that you can actually access intuition, which is not fearful, urgent, emotional. It's just a clear knowing. And so your psycho-spiritual work and the work that you do, mind, body, and spirit, to heal yourself, help you access more intuition, as primarily does a spiritual practice that helps you still the mind.
It's very important.
And so, I mean, this is really actually, I'm kind of grateful a little bit for what went on, because I've really kind of anchored into my spiritual practice a little bit more and increased it as well. And I've realized that, you know, there's an infinite wellspring of energy that you can channel into for healing that is connected to God. And we need to actually really focus on this healing energy that we can bring in through taking care of our bodies, through taking care of our minds, through making boundaries in the information we consume, and having a daily spiritual practice where you can, number one, I really think, work with the tension and the suppressed emotions in your body so you can release them and let them go. If you need tips on that, read Letting Go by David Hawkins. He gives a basic practice for that. But then also still the mind enough so that you can actually access true intuition, because the thing that clouds up our intuition is our suppressed emotions in our body, is all sorts of mental kind of things that we grasp onto. The Buddhists call it the monkey mind. And a lot of people are just completely driven from one distraction to the other and have never experienced or not experienced a moment of presence or stillness in a very long time. And this takes training. They call it training the mind. It's not like you just sit down and you meditate and all of a sudden God and presence appears. Well, sometimes it can, but it doesn't just happen overnight. It takes a daily spiritual practice where you can process what's going on in your body, develop a sense of stillness and clarity. And from that, insights emerge, healing emerges, the path that you're supposed to be on will naturally emerge. It clears out the fog and confusion.
Yeah, exactly. So that being said, we are under spiritual warfare, yes. But just want to close the first hour off with this. It's very important. One of the big red flags, and Rudolf Steiner talked about this, sure you've been to, even Gigi Young, we had her on our podcast, she also said that same. If you only see spiritual forces, entities, beings out there, and others, institutions, all there, the spiritual warfare, but not with how they operate also and influence you, it's a big red flag, right? Because everybody's influenced by them to varying degrees, right? We have to become very aware, and spiritual warfare really requires this inner differentiation. It's very important. So with that being said...
Yeah, so the next second hour, again, if you're not a member, you can go to veilofreality.com/membership. I think it's like $11, right? To sign up for the second hour for all of our podcasts. And on this second hour, we're going to talk about what this might mean, that all three outer planets, a couple of them will be going retrograde for a period of time. So we're kind of going a little bit backwards at the end of this year. What you might notice. We're going to talk more about how to heal from mass trauma, how to recognize dissociation, symptoms of PTSD, how they tend to show up, and the importance of co-regulation, self-regulation. What does that mean? How can we build healthy nervous systems to help us bring us back to center and heal the mass trauma, and some essential skills for healing with that. And then we'll also touch on how trauma and spiritual evolution have a relationship with each other via this concept of post-traumatic growth. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the personal and collective shadow. How do we integrate the shadow material that we see coming up? And what can we do to bring more of the light in through these chaotic times?
Excellent. And thank you so much for listening. And we'll be right back for the second hour.